Okay. Roger Hewitt. Edwin Harwood.
Here.
Robert Picken.
Here.
Shoshana Haran.
Here.
Juliet Pressel.
Here.
Carrie Chesney. Brian Weinert.
Here.
We have a quorum. So, first order of business is to approve the agenda. Has everybody had a chance to review that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Just want to mention that the email that we have received could go in the public comments section. And we may be adding an item on the approval on the commission business, but that's mostly comment. So I move that we approve the minutes. All in favor?
I think we're on agenda.
Pardon me?
Agenda?
I'm sorry. The agenda. Thank you.
No problem.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so let's review the minutes. Is everybody ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I move that we approve the minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. With regard to public comment, Chris, I think I'd like to read this email into the record.
Sure.
Okay. Chris received an email from John Chamberlain, who was hoping to attend the meeting today but was unable, and I believe you all have copies of it. John Chamberlain says, I cannot attend today's meeting, but I wanted to pass on my thoughts about a longer range matter that I believe warrants discussion and perhaps action. Whether the LOCC is the right venue for this, I'm not sure, but the fact that it meets today led me to send you this message your direction. If it should go elsewhere and you know where that is, I'd appreciate your letting me know. The fact that the mayor's salary is 2.67 times greater than a council member's salary strikes me as not in keeping with a council/manager form of government, city government. Is this disparity supported by the job descriptions of the positions? I see no problem with the mayor having a higher salary, but the difference seems very large. The mayor's salary is such that citizens most likely expect a much bigger time commitment from the mayor than they do from a member of council. I am concerned that the time commitment implied by the salary is such that potential mayoral candidates may be deterred from running because they would not be able to meet the time commitment of the mayor's job as well as their commitments to other jobs and family. I wouldn't want to make abrupt changes in the current salaries, but I think the LOCC or others should consider how to bring the salaries into better balance over time. I may, of course, turn out to be mistaken about the balance of responsibilities and time commitments required by the job descriptions, in which I'd be happy to reconsider my comments. Thanks for listening. John. I would just like to say that this, I think, strikes me as a very interesting and worthwhile point to discuss, and maybe something that we should also bring up at the larger city council meeting.
I have a question on the scope of our group and whether or not it's within our scope to determine the salary levels as much as it is the increases. I mean, I think that would be a bit of a starting point for me. Do we have that kind of authority to delve into this, or is that more of a matter for the council or the city's human resources group or whomever?
You have complete discretion over salaries.
Okay, good to know.
There is a matter that this may actually encompass. You have provided us with a copy of the section 117.5C of the Home Rule City Act, which is the statute that governs our existence, basically, and when we meet and when we make decisions and so forth. I am shortly going to make a motion that we go into closed session for the purpose of discussing with you, not deliberating with you, but receiving additional legal counsel with regard to the proposal that was made last time, that we try and see if we can't meet on an annual basis, not just an every other year basis. Do you believe, Chris, this is something that we should be asking legal advice about, or this other matter in terms of whether the statute grants us this authority? Or is that putting you on the spot there?
No, yeah, you can change the salary to whatever you'd like it to be.
Okay,
Obviously, council has the ability to reject it if they choose to.
right, okay.
Otherwise, it becomes the salary.
All right, so we don't need to have bring that up in
I
any
don't
closed
believe
session.
so, no.
Okay, all right. Wow, another reason we may want to have more time to think about this. How do we want to handle this?
We had talked last time about, in terms of compensation for time, and whereas I'm more familiar with the mayor's job description of being like, it's a half-time position, whereas city council is like how many hours. There was some surveying about how much time people put in, what is required, depends on how many committee meetings they have and how much that changes from one year to the next, that sort of thing. And so, I don't have additional information because it seems to have changed year to year, but I'm looking at other cities' comparisons, and at least, a few others that is the same in terms of the mayor is making more than city council by significant amounts. But I would need to look into it more.
All of these jobs are part-time jobs. How much any individual puts into them, obviously, there's some flexibility to the term part-time.
Sure.
If I recall what Mayor Taylor said the last time, it was that he spends a great deal of time on it, more than part-time, but he didn't begrudge it, and he didn't think that that was anything that warranted additional compensation on his part. That may speak to John's concern, because there doesn't seem to be any expectation of a certain amount of time. I think we, as citizens, just accept what people choose to commit to it. And then if we feel that the performance is inadequate in some way or another, there's always the next election. But this is a very intriguing suggestion. John's concern seems to be more that if the mayor's salary is that much higher, there is an unspoken expectation that the mayor, he or she, will devote extraordinary amounts of time. And I know that we all remember Ingrid Sheldon, who was everywhere all the time. She was just an amazing, nonstop Energizer Bunny type of lady. And one could get the impression that being mayor was necessarily full-time from her, but she loved it so much. That was just how she did things. And maybe Mayor Taylor is the same way. The thing that I'm wondering about, the question that's raised to me by John's question is, would it be, assuming that it was acceptable to the rest of Ann Arbor to consider a sizable increase in the city council members' salaries, to recognize that they too put a great deal into it, and to actually maybe make it a little bit more appealing to people to participate in local politics who might be otherwise feel that they couldn't make that commitment because the salary wasn't sufficient enough for them to be able to devote that much of their time to it.
Is there Chris, is there a specific job description that each council member and the mayor have that dictates the expected amount of time that each take? And then I know that they can clearly take more time if they choose to outside of that expected time, but is there something that's written down that we would be able to look at if this is something that we want to consider?
I'm not aware of anything that specifically speaks to the time commitment. I think the salaries were sort of a reflection of the expectation that they were to be part-time, since they're not full-time salaries for the most part. The duties, of course, are set forth in the charter and various other laws. So, and I think that was a discussion at the last session, what the actual duties were. So we have some of that information, but I'm not aware of anything that specifically speaks to it being part or full-time.
If I recall, the last session that we had, not the last meeting, but the last, I guess it would be 2 years ago, that's when we did the kind of self-reported survey of how much time people were taking. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes.
Yeah.
And as I recall, I think most of the people who responded commented that most city council people sit on at least 2 committees.
Yes.
And then the degree to which each one individually engages with, you know, sending out newsletters or responding to inquiries from their constituents varied. There are some people put in a great deal more time than others, and that was their choice.
Is it, I'm wondering, Chris, is it possible to pull up the section of the charter that lays out the duties, particularly for the mayor, to see how those stand apart from the duties of the city council member?
Yes. The duties are somewhat spread out throughout the charter, although there's a section that addresses city council and the mayor.
Okay.
It's available online as well if you want to.
Is it the kind of thing you could pull up and
I could,
tell us?
yeah, I can read the section that, chapter 4, which talks about the council and mayor. Essentially, it says all powers of the city are vested in the council, and then throughout the rest of the charter, it talks about what they actually do. And then the mayor says, in addition to the council duties, the mayor is the presiding officer of council, participates as a council member, has a veto power, gives the council information concerning the affairs of the city, and recommends such measures as deemed expedient. In emergency, have the powers conferred upon by law upon sheriffs to prevent disorder, preserve the public peace and health, and provide for the safety of persons and property. Execute or authenticate by signature instruments that the council requires or any law requires, be the ceremonial head of the city, and appoint all council committees, and make other appointments as provided by council. So that's kind of the basic differences. And then the other council duties, as I say, are spread throughout law, state law, ordinance, charter.
Thank you, that's helpful.
It does occur to me, first of all, that we're operating within a 45-day framework of when we first met to come to a resolution about what happens in the next 2 years. There is the outstanding question that I do want to move, that we go into closed session briefly to discuss with you about the possibility of meeting every year. But the thing that does occur to me is I'm really glad that John Chamberlain came forth and made public comment in this fashion. I would really want to hear from a larger constituent population. And I think it's still kind of a brand new idea to a lot of people that we are not only open meeting, but we're televised. But I would want to, I personally would want for there to be more notice to people that this topic would be under discussion at a certain point, and that we would welcome as many people as possible who wanted to come forth and say their piece, because, you know, we may have lots of authority, but we're still just a group of people that meet every other year with no audience. So with that said, is there any other discussion that we want to have on this point?
Yeah, I have a comment. It's been interesting to listen to all your thoughtful inputs. I'm not really taken by the issue of time and how much people put in. I think people should be judged or compensated really by what their responsibilities are. So I think some relationship between council and the mayor in terms of responsibility would make more sense to me than looking at how much time people are working in. You know, if the mayor is nothing more than a glorified member of council, then obviously that gap should be closer if you're looking at overall responsibilities. But if it's greater than that, then, you know, it should be greater by some factor. I also think that because of the time constraints under us too, that it's going to be difficult, not impossible, but difficult to really give this a thorough airing out within the time frame we have. And maybe that's something we eventually have to wave on for now, but that's my thought.
And I would just add to that, there is a precedent that goes back, I'd have to see, a good number of years with that sort of differential. And I guess we'd have to go back to the historical record to see when that gap emerged in the compensation structure that our predecessors have used as a guide for setting compensation for the mayor and council members. But I think we should take that seriously. Precedent matters, history matters. So not to say that it isn't explored or evaluated. I don't think now is the time to do so either, but as something for us and a broader constituency to engage with, I think would make sense. But I think there's some pretty compelling reasons at this point to hold fast to the basic structure that exists.
I think, yeah, I mean, whether or not we want more information in the future, depending on how people run, that's a different story. But just looking at it, like right now, even if the mayor's salary was full-time, like that's a living wage. And whereas council's is not. So I think we're almost looking more at if council's responsibility takes that much effort, then it's more of a raising of that as opposed to a lowering of the mayor's. But again, not necessarily something to look at now, but look at sort of long-term in terms of where we go in 2 years and 2 years and 2 years as opposed to today.
I agree. I guess as one final comment for myself, I do remember generally what the input was from the various council members at the time. I also remember that some people participated directly by communicating with us more directly, and some communicated more through the city attorney's office, kind of in a sort of seat of the pants type email of, oh, you know, this is what I think happens, and I'm very busy and can't answer now. But this is something that I think that if we were to have a discussion, again, I would want to have a lot of public input. I think we would want to be able to just put that out there so that it isn't just, you know, so that people have a chance for a robust discussion about it, because in the end, it's not just us who are going to want to talk about it.
Mhm.
Okay. Any other comments on this topic? Okay. Bringing up the prior proposal that we explore further the possibility of meeting on an annual basis, I did want to make a motion that we go into closed session for the exclusive purpose of discussing with the city attorney representative here what legal advice we should be having and what we can ask for. It would not include any kind of deliberations beyond that point. In fact, it would include no deliberations. So I would like to move that we do in fact go into closed session for a brief discussion with Chris on this topic. Is there a second?
Second?
Okay. We do need a 5-person vote.
Yeah, we'll do a roll call. Edwin Harwood,
Yes.
Robert Picken,
Yes.
Shoshana Haran,
Yes.
Juliet Pressel,
Yes?
Brian Weiner.
Yes.
Okay.
Motion carries. We are now in closed session.
Okay. screen.
Just announce we're back in open session.
Okay, so we are back in open session. Wow, it's magic. Okay. So regarding public discussion about the proposal last time from Brian, that we try and figure out if there is a way that we can meet in even years as well as odd years. I would like to propose that we pursue this by requesting an opinion of the Attorney General, which is the only legal opinion out there since 1985 interpreting the application of the Home Rule statutory provision regarding the LOCC. Because my review of the Attorney General's opinion covers, it shows that it covers two questions, and both of them really have to do with can we even meet in even years rather than odd years, and especially can we meet in even years when we have missed the odd year. Neither one of those questions, which got very, very substantial answers, addresses the issue that we have, or the proposal that we are considering, which is that in order to stay a little bit more on top of what we're doing and to have a little bit more of an easy transition from one meeting to the next, that we meet in even years in addition to meeting in the required odd years. With an awareness that there is a requirement in the statute that we have to finalize our decision within 45 days of our first meeting, it would be interesting for us to try and apply that as well to meetings in even years that the statute didn't really contemplate. But my question is, does the statute really prohibit such enthusiasm? And what I would like to propose, and I would like to propose really that the attorney's office take the lead on this, is that we request a formal opinion from the Attorney General's office, because if they think that such enthusiasm deserves support and can be countenanced by the statutory language, that will give us a basis for being able to move forward with that. Before I make any motion, would you be willing to?
Yes, I think it might be,
Address that?
if you're contemplating another meeting in this session, we could look into ways that we might do that, because there may be some options, and present those to you, and then perhaps you could choose one or recommend one, or, because I would need to look into that to be sure I was giving you the correct process for that.
Okay.
Yeah, and to that point, timing-wise, if this process, which we could follow and, dot all our i's, cross our t's, I mean, it could take a while for somebody to not only agree to do it, but to get in to do it. I mean, it could be weeks, but it's probably more likely going to be months, at which time our session would have transpired. So I think it's a good thing to pursue, because it's a great question, and the work that we would do in the even-numbered years doesn't really preclude us from doing what we need to do now.
Right.
And if we could...
And it may end up being, one possibility might be the form of a recommendation, say, to City Council to seek an opinion and let them take the lead on that. I'm not sure whether this body would necessarily have standing to ask that, so that would be something we'd have to look into.
And what I would think is that we are going to move forward today to finalize our business, or if not, to do it very shortly, because the time is running. This is more seeking guidance from an outside source over whose schedule we have no control.
And I would just add that I think there could be some nuances in the opinion that we ask of the Attorney General. Might there be an opportunity to meet, for example, during those even years, not make a determination during those even years, but allow us to at least convene and explore some of these issues in greater depth during those even years, not take formal action, though, until the authorized odd-numbered years that's laid out in the current statute, just as an example of a variation on the theme that would allow us to pursue some of these deeper dives into alternatives and directions, but not to take action in those even-numbered years, for example.
So if you wanted to do something today without me having all the information handy, I would probably recommend that you make a recommendation to City Council to seek this, and let them use their abilities to do that. If they wanted to direct either the city attorney's office or other staff to do it, they could, or if there was some other venue or some other avenue they could take to go through their representatives, then that might also be appropriate. Without getting into the specifics, that would probably be the easiest way to do that today, would be for you to pass a recommendation to the city council to pursue that.
And if they voted they didn't want to do it, I guess we're back to square one. And if we don't have the authority to move forward, we're kind of dependent on.
Yeah, again, I don't have all the information about how that might work from the LCC's point of view, so that's just my suggestion if you wanted to do something today and not reconvene with more information.
And it's my understanding that we would be asking for this so that we could use the extra time in those every year, I guess, to stay current with different changes in not necessarily just the economy, but look into some of these questions that may be posed by the citizens, like is the pay fair? Does it match the time commitment that's expected or required? Just to put it out there, and that's kind of what we're talking about, right? Okay.
Yeah, more along the lines of working sessions rather than moving toward a resolution in even years, especially because as we anticipate, as I said, I would anticipate more public comment on, this as well as other things. So I would be willing to move that we make a formal recommendation to City Council. I will say that I would feel a little stymied if they decided they didn't want to do it. But I guess that's the nature of the game. So I'm willing to make that motion, that we make a formal recommendation to City Council that they seek an Attorney General opinion on the question of whether we may, as the Local Officers Compensation Commission, meet in even years as well as odd years for the purpose of having a working session to gather information and further discussion whether or not any resolution comes from it at that time.
Is that without deliberating towards any salary changes?
I would say I don't want to put that restriction on it.
Okay.
Okay, and the other question, the sub-question then would be, if the Attorney General were to believe that the statute could permit that, would we be bound by the same considerations in even years in terms of 45 days, wrap up your business, as odd years? I would like them to actually address the specifics of how that would happen.
Is it possible to ask for the why? The why only in odd years to get that information? I don't know if they'll give it, or is it purely interpretation of the language of the law?
I wouldn't want to speculate on what part of a question they might or might not answer or how they would frame it.
Okay.
My take on it, and this is a very continuing discussion on emotion, but is that the statute says what it says. And I think, honestly, the Attorney General is basically going to just tell us that. There may not be anybody alive in the Attorney General's office who even knows what went into it. But anyhow, that's my motion. Is there a second?
I have a quick question. So does that
Okay.
preclude us then from, if we were to go forward with that, what happens with our determination of the salary for this 45-day period? Because I'm kind of with you that I think that this may take much longer than the end of our session. And do we not make a determination? If so, it sounds like the current salaries then would just continue, or do we make a determination in addition to the motion?
I was seeing it as two separate things. One is,
Just the motion
do we
and carry it?
set the salaries, make that resolution today, and we would like more information about general process for future action, not for this action. Is that
That's how I
what
see
I'm
it.
hearing?
That's how I see it.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
kind of what I was getting at, because otherwise I think it's just going to
Yeah.
be a cliffhanger out there.
I think we have to
Short-term
perform our
action.
statutory obligation, make our decision about the next 2 years now. I think that what we're going to anticipate, especially with the additional question that John Chamberlain raised, is there should be a lot of discussion, further discussion going in. And that's something that we can take up again so that it comes to fruition in 2019. Does that make sense? Okay,
I'll support the motion.
okay. All in favor?
Before we
Oh,
vote,
sorry.
though, I wanted to just clarify, assuming council were to act to seek Attorney General's opinion, and assuming the Attorney General would provide authorization for meeting in even-numbered years, that only opens the door, making that a possibility. I'm wondering if we would then either need or desire city council authorization or approval for us to, in fact, continue meeting during those even-numbered years. So even though the AG might give that authority, I would want to be very sure that we are, in fact, affirmed and authorized by city council to act, to, in fact, meet during those even-numbered years.
We do have a local ordinance that implements the state statute, and if there were any additional meetings, if it were decided that additional meetings were permitted and desired, that might be a amendment of that ordinance might be a way to do that.
Okay.
Okay. So, are we,
Yeah, can you read
Thank
that?
you.
Want to repeat that?
I don't have the transcript running in front of me, so my understanding was that there was a request a recommendation to City Council to seek an Attorney General opinion on the question of whether the LOCC may meet in even-numbered years in addition to odd-numbered years, and the even-numbered years would be a form of working session to gather further information and to keep up with current trends and get more public input. Something along those lines?
Yeah, well, no.
I think,
I think if you would have stopped at meeting in even number of years
Mhm.
and not put a limitation on what we can do or talk about,
Okay,
that would
would you
be,
prefer just that?
yes, I don't have any problem including those as examples of what might work on,
Okay.
but because the other part of the question was, and I'm guessing, but the other part of the question was, does the Attorney General believe that the same requirements would apply to even-numbered years as odd-numbered years? And that's just for the purpose of having it out there.
Okay.
My assumption is that they would.
So we do have a record of the original motion you made, but perhaps it's best if you restate it the way you intended so that everyone here is on the same page as you.
Okay, I don't have the transcript either. Okay, so, you got the first part. Do you want me to do the whole thing?
It might be best.
Okay, we need instant transcripts.
I know.
Okay, so, I move that we recommend to City Council that they seek an Attorney General opinion on whether this local officer's compensation commission may, in addition to meeting on the statutorily required odd years, also in the even years, and some of the purposes might be working sessions, gathering additional information, having more public discourse, but not limited to that. And secondly, that the Attorney General comment in addition on any restrictions, requirements, whatever mandates it believes would apply to a meeting in that year if they authorize it. That's my motion. Is there a
Again,
second? Thank you. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. So, the actual resolution.
Was that unanimous, just to be sure?
yes.
Okay.
Sorry. All right, so we have a proposed resolution that Chris provided us
Yeah,
with.
let me just talk a second about this. You had originally requested an average of the past couple of years using the local Ann Arbor CPI. There isn't a local Ann Arbor only CPI. It includes Flint and Detroit. So bearing that in mind and reading the guidance from the Bureau of Labor Statistics about how to use CPI for escalation, they recommend the national one because the local ones tend to have more sampling errors and be less accurate. So that's why the national one is used in this. And then that was for the full year of 2016 and through August of 2017, which was the most recent CPI numbers available. I believe the September ones come out on Friday forward. the national CPI. And then the average compensation for the non-union only, not including the union. And that's set forth in the whereas clause of the resolution. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. And if you look at the summary of the calculations of CPI on the first page of the packet I handed, it shows you the difference between the local, Midwest, and national. And they're all between 1.7 and 2.05, so not that much difference.
Well, I was actually struck by the fact that even though the CPI for Ann Arbor includes Detroit and Flint, which are two cities that are have fallen much harder times than Ann Arbor ever has, we raised that average to what I consider to be notably above the regional average,
Yeah, that's a good point.
and at least marginally above the national average. So these are just observations. Any comment? Other comment?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into this, obviously, and I'm probably more inclined to take the recommendation of the Bureau of Labor Statistics on what would make the most sense for our community, which would be the Detroit, Ann Arbor, Flint number. Unless there's a strong,
Just to be clear, they recommend using the national and not the
Oh.
locals.
okay, beg your pardon. I'm okay with their recommendation.
Okay. So we do have a draft of this resolution, and it does discuss what we had mentioned last time, or had discussed last time, which is kind of averaging or going with a mean. Has everybody had a chance to review the resolution?
I'd like to just make a note that, just in reference to last time when we were discussing this, we talked about doing this as creating something that would give us some reference point or starting point, and that didn't have to be the end-all, be-all for every time that we met, but just to have some idea of how we were coming up with a number as a starting point, and whether or not we use that all this time is up for discussion, I guess, but I just wanted to make that point so that we knew why we were doing this, so it's on record.
What do folks think about the actual calculations?
Well, one thing that jumps out to me, and I guess, I don't know if we talked about this or not, but the national 1.9% average is an annual average. So if you look back historically, I guess and use this as an inflation factor, it looks like since 2015, it's gone up 3.8. And we're looking to take half of that for the next 2 years. So we had, I guess, part of my thinking is that if we're going to use this context kind of as a bit of a guide, then we should make sure that we're not, that we're taking into fact that this is going to cover a 2-year period. And if we're going to look at 2 years to say, well, we'll give them half over 2 years, and that's what we want to do, that's totally up to us. But I'm just kind of bringing that as a point of information.
So when you say half over 2 years, you mean a 1% increase or whatever?
Yes.
1 point
Yeah.
something percent increase and then another, just the way we did the last time?
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, does this not include just a 2.2 for each year?
Yes, it's intended to reflect roughly the average annual increase of the past 2 years. So, and projecting that forward, so it's 2.2% each year.
So in effect, if we were to do 1.1 this for next year and an additional 1.1 the following year, that we would be at half of what the projection is for the total. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
No.
Well, yes, it would be half. If we presume that the annual increase is going to be 2% for the next year and you're only giving 1, then yes, you're half of what the projected is.
But the way you have it here is including 2.2% in 19, and then 2.2% on 19 salary for 2020.
Yeah, essentially, it's taking the average of the last 2 years and guesstimating that that's going to be roughly what it is going forward for each of the next 2 years.
Yeah, which I think is what Robert was getting at, that he thought it would be fair to include that, right? To have the full change
Yeah.
1 year to the next. Yeah.
So we would be approving 2.2% increase for the next year, and then a 2.2 increase in addition the following year.
That's how I understand it.
Yes.
So I'm looking at the wage increase for city employees union, and, I mean, that's basically it's comparable to what they have. I tend to lean towards the idea that the people at the top get the smallest increases comparative to everybody else, so as long as we're within that range. There is one union that's only 1%, so that's worth knowing. But it's a union of 5, so it's a smaller group.
I'd like to just make one other point, and it's kind of in relation to what John had commented on, and I think he was, in his email, it talks more about what the salaries are versus what we were doing with these numbers here, which is kind of finding a way to measure or to start with a ruler for how we determine the change of the salary. So I know that doesn't address John's question, and I think that's more what we were talking about with getting the opinion to meet every year to be able to delve into that. But that's where this 2.2, the average of the CPIs and the salary changes took place. So in my opinion, this is pretty fair. It's definitely a black and white way to look at it. Doesn't mean it's the right way, but I think it's a good starting point.
Any further comment on it?
Yeah, I would just add too, that I think the total salary budget is a pretty small percentage of the city budget. So this isn't going to have a huge impact cost-wise going forward. Secondly, it's a recommendation, and council historically has not bought our recommendations year over year over year. I mean, I'm looking through the history, about half of them get shot down. So I think our ability to demonstrate some thought relative to process and trying to come up with an objective approach to how this ought to be looked at is good. I feel good about that, and hopefully that the people voting on this would agree with that and support what we're doing. But at the same time, there's the whole affordability question, and you know, is the city ready for this kind of increase, and yes or no? And I guess that'll be up to council to decide whether or not that makes sense. So.
That was much more eloquently stated than I was able to do.
Just out of curiosity, is this retroactive since the budget's already started? Or is it as of whatever meeting they vote on it, is where the change goes into effect?
Well, the way the resolution is written is that it will change in the next fiscal year, so July 1st of 2018.
Okay, got it. Yes.
So it's entirely
Forward-looking.
okay.
So I think it might be time for somebody else to sponsor a motion if we are going to go ahead and.
I will make a motion to accept, I guess this is the resolution as it's written.
Second? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? I'm an aye. Okay. So, Chris, you will take responsibility for transmitting this to the city then?
Yes.
Okay,
We'll
excellent.
file it with the clerk's office and inform council.
How soon is that likely to happen?
Probably this week.
That's excellent.
The clock, council has a clock of 30 days after it's filed to act on it, so their clock doesn't start running until it's filed. So we'll do that as soon as we can.
So the last order of business for me is just to reiterate that it's very easy for us to get busy, and putting aside the question of what the AG's office says about whether it says yes or no, whether city council says yes or no, we will have an obligation to meet again in 2019. And I would just ask that we all be mindful of our resolution of last time, that we are going to make best efforts to meet within the first quarter of that year, so that any recommendations that we make, which may very much look like the resolution we just came up with, can be addressed in the budget before it's actually cast. Because yes, it's true that it is a small portion of the budget, but the money has to come from somewhere. So that was just me reminding us. Do things like this get calendared that far out?
Not necessarily. I would suggest that folks get in contact with our office around about that time
Okay,
and remind us.
okay,
We will try to do the same.
all right.
And also just a point of clarification, what's the term of our appointments?
7
Will we
years.
still be here?
Yes, unless we walk away.
It's 7
Okay.
years.
Is there anybody here who has been, was appointed prior to 2015?
I
I don't think
almost-
Carrie was.
Yeah,
and
Roger was.
Roger may be our old,
Yeah. I would have to check the Register page for the boards and commissions, has all the dates of appointments and expirations.
so we can expect to see all the same faces, God willing, with the possible exception of Roger.
Actually, Roger was just reappointed, I believe, so.
Okay, perfect, all right.
That's what he gets for not showing up.
Yep. Okay. Is there anything else we need to discuss before closing? Doesn't sound like it. So I move to adjourn the meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay.
Meeting's adjourned.
And